In Chapter 1 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains a simple idea that changed modern psychology. You can't live beyond your self-image. Maltz discovered this as a plastic surgeon. He saw that some patients changed instantly after surgery. New face, new confidence, new life. But others, even after a flawless operation, still felt ugly, unworthy, or not good enough. Their appearance changed. Their self-image didn't. Maltz realized that the mind works like a target-seeking machine. If your inner picture says, "I'm a failure," you'll act in ways that protect that identity. But when your inner picture changes, when you imagine yourself capable, confident, and worthy, your behavior automatically adjusts to match it. The self-image is not a metaphor. It's the blueprint your nervous system obeys. Chapter 1 is Maltz's message that transformation starts inside. When you change the picture in your mind, you change the life around you. In Chapter 2 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains that every human has an automatic guidance system, a built-in success mechanism. It works like a missile or a guided torpedo. Once you pick a target, your mind begins adjusting your behavior to reach it. The surprising part is this. The mechanism doesn't care whether the target is good or bad. It will move you toward whatever picture you hold. If you constantly imagine failure, your brain treats it as the goal and steers you in that direction. But when you choose a clear aim, a skill, a project, a new identity, the success mechanism starts working for you. Maltz says you don't make success happen through force. You allow it by giving your system a precise, meaningful target. The job of the conscious mind is to choose the goal. The job of the subconscious is to guide you toward it through creativity, intuition, and automatic adjustments you don't even notice. When you stop aiming at fear and begin aiming at purpose, your inner mechanism finally knows where to go. Maxwell Maltz believed your imagination is more powerful than your intelligence. Because your subconscious doesn't care what's true, it only cares what you rehearse. In surgery, Maltz saw that a scar could change a person's entire life. But he also saw the opposite. People with no physical flaws still lived as if they were broken. The difference wasn't their face. It was the picture they carried inside their mind. Experiments in psychology confirmed it. Athletes improved their performance by rehearsing in imagination as much as in real practice. Their muscles fired in the same patterns even when they weren't moving. Your nervous system responds to imagined failures the same way it responds to real ones. And imagined success activates the same pathways as real confidence. For Maltz, imagination was not daydreaming. It was the steering wheel of the entire success mechanism. If you constantly rehearse fear, self-doubt, and worst-case scenarios, your system takes that as its target. But when you imagine yourself acting boldly, speaking clearly, succeeding naturally, your subconscious begins moving you toward it without you noticing. Because your life always follows the pictures you allow to live in your mind. In Chapter 4 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains that most people live under a quiet hypnosis, not from a magician, but from their own past. A single comment from childhood, a failure in school, a rejection, or an embarrassing moment can become a command the brain obeys for decades. Maltz says the nervous system doesn't question these old beliefs. If the picture feels real, the body acts as if it is real. You think you're shy, so your voice gets smaller. You believe you're unlucky, so you notice only misfortune. You assume you're not good enough, so you avoid opportunities you could win. These beliefs aren't facts. They're memories masquerading as truth. Maltz compares it to waking up from a bad dream. Nothing actually changed. You simply realized the dream wasn't real. To break the old hypnosis, you have to challenge the belief, not yourself. Ask, who gave me this idea? Is it based on my present or my past? What if this belief isn't true anymore? The moment you question the old picture, the spell weakens. The nervous system begins updating, and your success mechanism finally has permission to aim somewhere new. Because the limits you think you have are usually just illusions you forgot to stop believing. In Chapter 5 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains that your nervous system reacts to your thoughts, not to reality. If you imagine danger, your body responds with fear, even when nothing is happening. If you imagine failure, your muscles tighten as if you're actually losing. Maltz says this is why rational thinking matters. Most people never question their first reaction. They feel anxious and assume the feeling is proof. But emotion is not evidence. It's just the body acting on an old idea. Rational thought works like a filter. Instead of believing every fear, you ask, is this actually true? Is this happening? Or am I replaying an old story? When you step back, the fear loses authority. The thought loses power. And your nervous system calms down because the threat was never real. Maltz teaches that rational thinking is not cold or mechanical. It's a tool to correct distorted images and give the success mechanism accurate information. Because when your mind sees clearly, your life begins to move in the right direction, not by force, but by alignment. In Chapter 6 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains a paradox. You can't force success, because tension, anxiety, and overthinking actually shut down the very mechanism designed to help you. Your success mechanism works like a guidance system. It corrects, adjusts, and finds solutions only when the mind is calm enough to let it operate. Maltz noticed that his patients performed their best not when they tried the hardest, but when they relaxed. Athletes call it playing loose. Artists call it being in flow. Psychologists call it parasympathetic activation, the state in which the brain becomes creative, precise, and intuitive. When you strain, you block the process. When you ease up, the system takes over. Maltz taught simple methods: mental rehearsal, deep breathing, and deliberately relaxing the body before performance or decision-making. Because your brain needs space to do its work. The more you trust the mechanism, the better it guides you. You don't build confidence by force. You build it by allowing your inner system to show you what it can do. Relaxation isn't laziness. It's intelligence. It's the doorway through which your best abilities finally come through. Maxwell Maltz argued that happiness isn't an emotion, it's a habit, a learned mental posture. He noticed that people who had every reason to be happy often weren't, while others facing difficulty still carried lightness, humor, and warmth. The difference wasn't circumstance, it was practice. Psychology confirms this. Your nervous system rewires around what you repeat. If you rehearse tension, resentment, or fear, your body learns to live there. But if you practice calm thinking, gratitude, and constructive imagination, the pathways of happiness strengthen the same way muscles do. Maltz taught that happiness comes from focusing on solutions instead of problems, on what's working instead of what's missing. Not by forcing positivity, but by choosing thoughts that make effective action possible. The habit of happiness is built in small daily choices: where you place attention, how you interpret setbacks, and what inner picture you return to when life gets heavy. Because happiness isn't luck. It's a direction you walk toward on purpose. In Chapter 8 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains that success isn't an accident. It's a personality pattern you build from the inside out. He noticed that people who achieved consistently shared the same internal qualities, whether they were surgeons, salesmen, athletes, or artists. The pattern wasn't talent, it was attitude, calmness under pressure, a sense of direction, the ability to respond instead of react, and the courage to act without waiting for perfect conditions. Maltz believed these traits weren't inherited. They were habits of thought that train the nervous system to expect success. Modern psychology agrees. Optimism, emotional control, and initiative change your stress hormones, decision-making, and even how your brain processes feedback. You don't become a success personality by force. You cultivate it through small behaviors repeated often until confidence becomes automatic. Because success isn't something you chase. It's something your self-image learns to recognize. In Chapter 9 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains that crisis itself is not what damages people. What damages them is the failure mechanism, the mental reflex that turns stress into panic, mistakes into identity, and pressure into paralysis. Maltz observed that in moments of crisis, two very different patterns appear. One person tightens, rushes, and overreacts. Their nervous system treats the situation as a threat. Another person slows down, gathers information, and responds creatively. The difference isn't intelligence, it's emotional conditioning. Maltz explains that the failure mechanism is triggered by fear, anger, resentment, and guilt, states that block perception and narrow options. When those reactions are interrupted, the mind regains flexibility. Modern psychology confirms this. Calm nervous systems process more data, see more possibilities, and adapt faster under pressure. Maltz's insight is simple but precise. Crisis doesn't destroy creativity. Emotional overreaction does. When the failure mechanism is switched off, crisis becomes feedback, and feedback becomes opportunity. In Chapter 10 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains that many of our limitations aren't caused by reality, but by emotional scars left by past experiences. A single humiliation, rejection, or failure can leave a lasting imprint on the nervous system, not as a memory, but as a reaction pattern. Long after the event is over, the body still responds as if it's happening again. Maltz observed that people often protect these emotional scars the same way they protect a physical wound, by avoiding situations that might touch it. But avoidance doesn't heal. It reinforces the injury. Modern psychology confirms this. The nervous system updates itself only when it experiences safety in the presence of what once caused pain. Maltz taught that emotional scars fade not through analysis alone, but through corrective emotional experiences. Small moments of courage, controlled exposure, new responses replacing old reflexes. Each time you face a situation without the expected damage occurring, the brain rewrites its prediction. The scar loses its authority. Because emotional wounds don't disappear by force, they dissolve when the nervous system learns that the danger is no longer real. In Chapter 11 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz argues that most people don't lack personality. They lack permission to use it. He noticed that the shy, the anxious, the quiet ones weren't actually empty inside. They were full of traits, talents, humor, and courage, but buried under self-consciousness. Maltz describes self-consciousness as a spotlight turned inward, a constant monitoring of how you look, sound, or compare. And that spotlight shuts down spontaneity. Personality isn't something you build. It's something that appears when the spotlight finally turns off. Modern psychology confirms this. When people stop monitoring themselves, The brain's fear circuits relax, creative centers activate, and natural expression emerges effortlessly. Maltz's insight is simple. You don't create personality. You release it. When you stop trying to perform, you start to be. And when you stop worrying how others see you, your nervous system unlocks the traits that were always there: confidence, humor, warmth, individuality. Because the real you was never missing, just hidden under too much thinking. In Chapter 12 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains that the mind creates its own stress far more often than life does, and the same imagination that fuels fear can also produce calm. He noticed that patients who healed fastest were not the ones with perfect bodies, but the ones with quieter minds. Maltz called certain thoughts mental tranquilizers, simple ideas that immediately soften the nervous system. I have time. I can choose my response. This situation is not life or death. Modern research agrees. When you introduce even one calming thought, stress hormones drop, breathing slows, and the brain shifts from threat mode to clarity. These tranquilizers aren't denial. They're reminders that most anxiety comes from imagination, not reality. Maltz's message is straightforward. You don't need pills to calm your mind. You need a moment, a breath, and a thought that brings you back to yourself. Because peace is not something you wait for. It's something you practice. In Chapter 13 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz challenges a common belief that stress is always harmful. Maltz explains that stress itself is not the enemy. It's the meaning we attach to it. The same tension that destroys one person can sharpen another. He observed that successful individuals don't eliminate stress from their lives. They use it as a signal. Stress becomes harmful when the nervous system interprets it as danger. But when the mind interprets it as a challenge, the body responds differently. Heart rate rises, but focus increases. Energy mobilizes, instead of collapsing. Modern psychology supports this idea. Research shows that people who view stress as a resource rather than a threat perform better, recover faster, and experience fewer negative health effects. Maltz believed the key was attitude. Not pretending stress doesn't exist, but deciding what it means. When you stop fighting tension and start directing it, stress becomes fuel. Not pressure that breaks you, but pressure that shapes you. Because success isn't the absence of strain. It's the ability to stay oriented while carrying it. In Chapter 14 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explains that confidence doesn't come before success. It comes from small wins remembered by the nervous system. He noticed that people who succeed consistently are not more talented or fearless. They simply know how to create what he called that winning feeling. The nervous system learns emotionally, not logically. It doesn't respond to advice. It responds to experience. Each small success leaves a physical trace: calmer breathing, relaxed muscles, faster decisions. Over time, these sensations teach the body, this is how winning feels. Failure does the opposite. It trains hesitation, tension, and doubt. Maltz's insight was practical. You don't need big victories to build confidence. You need small, real successes, repeated often. When your nervous system remembers success, confidence becomes automatic. Because winning isn't an attitude you force. It's a feeling your body learns to recognize. In Chapter 15 of Psycho-Cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz explores a question most psychology ignores: why some people seem to age faster than others, even with similar bodies. Maltz draws on the work of stress researcher Hans Selye, who showed that the body has a limited supply of adaptation energy, the capacity to respond, recover, and repair. Chronic stress doesn't just feel unpleasant. It accelerates wear on the nervous system, weakens immunity, and shortens the body's ability to renew itself. But Maltz noticed something important. People who lived with purpose, optimism, and emotional balance seemed to conserve this energy. He also points to the body's built-in repair network, the reticuloendothelial system, which becomes more effective when the mind is calm rather than constantly threatened. Aging, Maltz argues, is not just biological, it's psychological. When fear, resentment, and tension dominate the inner life, the body behaves as if it's under attack. But when the mind operates from clarity, meaning, and calm, the body shifts into maintenance and repair. The goal isn't to add years mechanically, but to live in a way that gives your nervous system permission to sustain you longer. More life in your years comes before more years in your life.